Sync on. The reason why I have VSync on, and like I said, I go into more detail in that other graphics video, but essentially I have VSync on and I have VSync off in my NVIDIA control panel. That actually makes it so that my limit is -1, i.e. there is no limit on my frames. So sometimes I'm up, lucky enough to get 180, 200 frames on labs or in factory or whatever. So that's nice. I haven't experienced any input lag, but your mileage may vary. So I have my texture quality as high as it can go on high, shadow quality on ultra. I just like the way that it looks. The shadows are softer. LOD quality all the way down because I haven't noticed a huge improvement when it's up in terms of looks, but I do get slightly better performance when it's all the way down. Visibility about 1000 is like reasonable, I think. Shadow visibility at 70. I have all this shit turned off because all these different effects don't seem to improve the way the game looks. They just tank your frames. And then I have FXAA on because even though I don't notice a huge difference between off and FXAA for anti-aliasing, it does seem like I get better frames with it on. I got sharpness about halfway up, and I have all 3 of these settings on the bottom turned off because they just either look weird or cause negative performance without any sort of major additional benefit, in my opinion, to the way the game looks. For sound, I just have everything cranked up, about halfway up, and I have all 3 of these settings on the bottom turned off because they just either look weird or cause negative performance.
What's going on, guys? It is Panjadu here. On the video, the system steps are out of the way. You can change our default of Windows every single mission. We can know current user, clicking on the arrow, delete, and select yes. Once you guys have done that, we can then go ahead and exit out of the room. These keys one at a time, and clicking on these keys will reset the default value within inside of your reg editor. What we're going to be doing is going back, starting off with system, go with medium, and if you're on an ultra high-end or high-end PC, go high at the highest. The reason you want to set this up properly and match this to your system specs, as in most case scenarios, running low-end can actually do AO should be switched to off, SSR should be switched off, anisotropic filtering should also be switched off. Sharpness can be set to anything you wish to do so, this is personal preference and does not affect performance. I like a sharpness of 0.7. Lobby FPS limit should be set to 30 as there's no reason to keep this higher and it keeps the GPU cooler for longer. Game FPS limit should be set all the way up to 120. Z-blur, chromatic aberrations, noise and grass shadows should all be unchecked. Once those have been set up, take yourself over to the right hand side and press save. Take yourself back to the bottom right hand side once again, back to the settings cog, this time going over to post FX, and it is highly recommended to actually disable all post FX within inside of the game, as this can drastically decrease FPS, and honestly you shouldn't actually be using these options as many of the options are still available within inside of the NVIDIA control panel and the AMD Radeon settings panel. With inside, do not be switched 50% video towards it, and press control and will start the timer.
There's essentially an infinite number of combinations of graphics cards, processors, system resolutions, refresh rates, monitor types and settings, graphics drivers, and really understand what and I don't really. Now let's start with VSync. VSync is responsible for the synchronization of a game's frame rate and the refresh rate of the monitor, and is most commonly discussed when dealing with things like screen tearing. Now this is a topic, honestly, I really don't want to get deep into here. It's a whole other ball of wax, and I don't really have strong opinions about things like, whether or not it causes input lag or whatever else folks talk about related to it. But I will say that I have VSync enabled in game, but then disabled for Tarkov in my NVIDIA control panel application settings, and I play the game in full screen mode. These few things allow me to capture my gameplay at the quality that I want without getting screen tearing when I'm recording through my capture card, and has the effect of unlocking the frame rate limit that you see in the game. so I can go above, a few FPS. So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Now, the texture streaming option is there, as I understand it, primarily for lower-end graphics cards with limited VRAM purposes, especially when trying to do things like side-by-side comparisons. So for the vast majority of tests I do throughout this video, I have this set to... Alright, moving on. Now, it can be kind of hard to suss out the difference between the two settings in many of these things. Alright, now let's talk about object LOD. If you're into photography, you might... Now, games dynamically swap different quality versions of the same far enough away, but of course what we experience as a result of this behavior in many cases is that object setting is typically the cause of this when it comes to objects in the environment. You would never notice yourself. Tarkov's first anti-aliasing were evident when looking at object tagged, whereas TAA acts on multiple neighboring frames in a series, blending them together to fix in motion. Moving right along, and turning it up 2x or 4x super sampling, they can, get a decent image quality as before with a bit of a performance boost. Now, my personal experience with this setting is that turning it down below 1x or off gives me in the range of an additional, 20, 30, 40 FPS, but honestly makes the game look just really shitty and blurry. And turning it up to 2x can make it look slightly nicer at the cost of anywhere from 30 to 50 FPS. I'm kind of a sucker for depth of field effects, and it has some in post.
Welcome about object and comments on my video for the 80 no by 1080 resolution on on 15 gigs of issues or frame drops. I have my texture set to high because I pushed it up to 75 PAA. This is kind of dependent on your preference and your monitor, and the frame limits are set to max for both the lobby and basic graphics. The goal is the same as my off. I do turn my color from jagged setting 5 and 20 and consistent setup. I've got links to my Twitch stream, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone.
People that have and everything, because I've done testing before as well, so I've always had it on borderless or full screen windowed. Then the overall quality is set to high, but that will change to custom anyway once we start delving in and changing more settings, so you could pretty much leave that where it's to high, or they don't make it 7 by nice when you're me and £12.9. That isn't some of content. Stay safe everyone, I hope you're keeping well. Give your sister or your mother a kiss from me, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye. I'd like to thank you all for staying to the end of this video, but before I end it, I want to tell you something about Shadow. You can play any... happy to respond. So we're going to start with my screen resolution, that's just my monitor's native resolution, and my screen mode is borderless. The reason I've got it as borderless is because I do a lot of tabbing in and out to different monitors. If you don't do that, feel free to have it on full screen, but people saying that borderless gives you an input delay, you don't really notice it on Tarkov. I've done testing before as well, so I've always had it on borderless or full screen windowed.
There's essentially an infinite number of combinations of graphics cards, processors, system resolutions, Alright, let's bust out 3 settings real quick that describe the... Alright, let's bust out 3 settings real quick that don't really need a ton of detail or explanation. Sharpness, Z-blur, and noise. Let's start with Z-blur. What it basically is just an added depth of field effect that pretty much only results in the butt end of your gun, the part closest to your face, to be blurry relative to the rest of it. It seems most people don't like this setting, but I actually think it looks kind of cool, and I'm kind of a sucker for depth of field effects, and it has no noticeable performance impact, so I personally keep it on. Noise is a visual effect that, as far as I can tell, is really only there for cinematic reasons. You can think of it like a sort of film grain effect, and could be cool in an immersive video or something like that if you're a content creator, but otherwise I think it's just kind of ugly, especially when coupled with some of the post effects and other graphics settings that affect the sharpness, contrast, clarity, etc. Also, there doesn't seem to really be any performance difference with it on versus off. Alright, lastly, let's take a look at sharpness, which is a blanket term used to describe the clarity of an image in terms of contrast and or focus. Now again, this setting doesn't seem to have a significant performance cost, and given how blurry and washed out many people feel Tarkov's default look and feel is, I think most folks are probably going to benefit from having this setting somewhere between 1 and 3-ish, depending on their personal preference. SSR, or Screen Space Reflections, adds realistic environmental reflections to many of the reflective surfaces in the game. Now this is going to be noticeable when looking at things like bodies of water and even damp floors and puddles. Now this setting has a range of performance costs from small on the low end to moderate on the ultra end, and to some it may be a bit subtle, and especially during the heat of their standard gameplay experience, but it's really hard to beat the look and immersion of a scene like this with it on. Now on to the second to last setting, anisotropic filtering. To understand this setting a bit better, let's take a look at the etymology of the word anisotropic. If we look at the root components of the word, an meaning not, iso meaning the same, and tropic related to tropism, which relates loosely to direction or angle, what this term essentially means is that processing is applied to textures of objects in the environment that are at varying angles from the camera in the scene. This attempts to remedy the same aliasing issues discussed previously, but is different in practice as it acts on higher level textures rather than the pixels that make up those textures, and because of this can achieve similar results without the unwanted effect of blurring mentioned earlier. Now of course that's all theoretical, because no matter how much I tried, I couldn't find any examples in the environment in-game where this setting seemed to actually do anything noticeable. In hindsight, it's most likely that these textures were on ultra, making them higher quality and maybe not being susceptible to the same sort of issues. I'm not really sure, but honestly at this point there's no way in hell I'm going to go back to test this on a lower resolution or texture quality settings, so we're just gonna move right along. It can also make for a... Alright, and tweak the knobs until your eyes on this difference between post-effects processing on versus off, and it didn't seem like changing any of the values between minimum and maximum had any real further effect on the performance, so adjust these to your heart's content. Alright, so to...
justo, tío. Wow.